All right. So you
Yeah.
set this in about Saskatchewan and their decision on American alcohol.
Yeah.
And it seemed like a really interesting place to dig in on trade and the complexities of it and how
It did.
sometimes these things can have like these ripple effects that you don't always think about.
Huh.
So, yeah, so Saskatchewan, the big thing here is they initially decided to stop buying all American alcohol as a response to U.S. tariffs.
Right.
So it's sort of like a retaliatory thing, like, oh, you're going to do this to us.
Yeah.
We're not going to buy your stuff.
Yeah, tit for tat.
Right.
Right, exactly. And I think what's interesting here is it was so broad. It was like all American branded alcohol. And this is where it gets interesting for you, right? Because
Right.
initially when they said that, you're like, okay, well, Jack Daniels and stuff like that. But like
Right.
the thing is, like, even American brands like Budweiser, Coors, these big names.
Right. We just assume they're all made in America.
Exactly. And that's not actually the case. A lot of those are actually produced in Canada.
Oh,
Yeah.
So it's not really about, where the brand is from. It's about where it's actually made.
interesting. Okay.
And that's what I think caused the need for them to kind of adjust this thing.
And they did adjust it, right? Like they
I did.
partially reverse course.
They did. So they're now allowing the sale and distribution of 54 of these U.S. brands
Yeah.
that are actually produced in Canada.
Okay.
So
It's interesting. Yeah.
So they're still saying, okay, we're not going to buy the stuff that's actually made in the U.S.,
exactly.
but the stuff that's made in Canada, even if it's got an American brand on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Labatt's,
We're cool with that.
Yeah, we're cool with that. And I think the government kind of explicitly said, we heard concerns that the ban was too broad
Yeah.
and we're realigning our approach to focus on, the stuff actually made in the US.
Okay.
And this actually brings them more in line with other provinces as well. So, it just highlights the challenges of kind of precisely targeting these things. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting too, like the industry reaction, because Beer Canada called the initial decision heavy-handed
Yeah.
and misguided.
Oh, yeah. They were not.
So it's not just
That's
like a
not-
theoretical thing. Like this could have had real impact
Absolutely.
on that industry.
Absolutely. And I think, the fact that they responded positively to the reversal
Mm-hmm.
shows how much,
Yeah.
of a benefit it is to be
Yeah.
able to, continue to sell these brands that are made here in Canada.
Right.
And they actually explicitly called out, benefits to the Saskatchewan distributors, retailers, businesses, and even like the barley farmers.
Yeah. There's a quote from CJ Helly at Beer Canada that I thought was interesting. He was talking about Team Canada
Yeah.
and how like we need to be supporting, our businesses, our workers, our farmers when we're facing these international trade pressures. It's about more than just like the beer itself. It's about
About protecting our own.
the whole
Yeah.
ecosystem here.
Absolutely. And, one really interesting stat that really highlights this is, 88% of all beer consumed in Canada is made in Canadian breweries
Wow. Okay.
by Canadian workers
Yeah.
using local ingredients, including Saskatchewan barley.
So that initial ban could have taken a huge chunk
That's a big chunk.
out of the Canadian beer industry, even though it's an American brand on it.
Exactly. And that's what's so fascinating about this. It's like,
Yeah.
you think of a beer and you don't think about,
Right. It's just beer.
yeah, all this stuff behind it. And I think that's kind of the takeaway for you listeners. Like,
Yeah.
it's a reminder that, international trade and even like a beer that you might buy at the store
Mm-hmm.
can have these
Yeah.
complex, origin stories and trade policies can have these weird impacts.
Yeah. And it's a reminder that like those policies are happening all the time. Like there's these
That's a good thing.
negotiations and these things, and they can have these real world effects.
Absolutely. And I think this situation shows that, it's not always
Right.
easy to predict what those effects are going to be.
Yeah.
Even products that seem domestic could be affected.
Yeah. Makes you think, huh?
It does make you think.
How often do we actually stop and think like, where did this thing come from?
Yeah.
How did it get to my hands?
Absolutely.
How many different international trade agreements are, somehow tied into this?
Exactly. And what other, quote unquote, American products that we see every day actually have, Canadian connections?
Yeah.
So much to think about.
Thanks for taking the deep dive with us.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
See you next time.